You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 611, where tonight we are going to kick off the first of several Andor Spotlight episodes. And we purposely picked tonight's, character spotlights as being Luthen and Kleya, because I think in the grand scheme of a lot of things here, those two characters really stood out for different reasons, both in season 1 and season 2. But it was that dynamic relationship that they had, the relationship dynamic that they had, I should say, that really got us excited to kind of kick these Spotlight character episodes off to begin with in the first place. And to help me do all that is, of course, Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Do you think people say that about us? We have like this dynamic relationship or relationship dynamic?
No, I don't think so.
That's fair enough. Yeah.
But this is... You know, we've been putting these episodes off for a while. We've had other things go on.
Not that long, actually.
I mean, it's been about a month now, at least, right?
Well, but let's be fair. We needed a little decompressed time from Andor, too. It's so intense.
Too much.
Yeah, you needed some time to watch some Rogue One as well and go through all the feels and the emotions. But we need a little time to kind of decompress and like sit with what we saw in season 2. And then we need a little time to go back and reflect on season 1, too. It's been a while since we've even talked about season 1 for the most part. So
right.
Seeing where these characters were, it was actually interesting. I went and rewatched. It surprised me. I had to go in halfway through the season to get to Luthen and Kleya in the first place, which I didn't remember that at the beginning. And then it was a little interesting where the characters ended up and where they started. I'm really excited to talk about that part of it because they were almost on the other side of the coin when we meet them for the first time from where they end up in towards the end of season 2.
Yeah, I've got the same note in my notes actually.
Yeah. That should be a lot of fun. But you know who's the same every single week for us, Albert?
Our Patreon supporters.
Our amazing Patreon supporters. Yeah, and again, welcome to Greg. We appreciate you signing up as well. Huge thanks to all of our now part of the tribe members, Alex, Danny, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Riss, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Rita Reborn, and I've got a Brad feeling. And of course, our Delusions of Grandeur members, our top tier. Now, this is Rod Racing, CJ, Steve, and Rob. And of course, thanks to all of our YouTube members as well. We appreciate your support there. If you are curious about Patreon, cantinacast.com/Patreon. We just did another comic book episode this past week where we finished up the Darth Maul Black, White, and Red series. That was a lot of fun. Kind of a weird series, but a lot of fun. And we're doing a lot of great things over on Patreon. So I encourage everyone to go sign up for that. We got a tier for everybody, video and audio as well. Shout out to all of the folks over in the live stream as well. cantinacast.com/YouTube if you'd like to join us in the live stream. The days are all out of sorts now that we're in summertime, so thanks for bearing with us a little bit. This is a Monday night, so a little bit different for us, but the dates are going to be a little bit crazy here for a few months, but thanks everyone for doing that. And a special welcome to my Star Wars guys, Sky, Alex, One Up versus CPU, and Steph so far. We see you folks in the background. We hope you'll come out and say hello as the show goes on and leave us some of your thoughts about Luthen and Kleya as we go.
Yeah. And don't forget to like this episode, please, if you don't mind. If you're live with us tonight or if you're watching this on replay, always helpful for us. Let's see, programming notes. This Sunday, so 6 more days, we're going to come back and do our second Spotlight episode, and we're going to do 2025's couple of the year, Dedra and Cyril Karn. So that should be a lot of fun to really get into the minds of those two wackos. And
there's going to be a lot of awkward staring and pauses, I think.
I think we'll kind of script it and we'll block it as such, where at moments you and I will just kind of be facing off and not really saying anything. It'll make for great audio listening. But yeah, I think that's a good idea.
People might ship us. You would ship us then. Because you'd be like, there's some subtext there. There's some subtext.
Subtext. So join us. That'll be a public show as well. So that'll be 6/12 where we'll be doing that. So please join us for that character spotlight as well. Okay, let's get into this. Let's talk about it. And so the way I kind of want to do this was let's talk about Kleya. Let's talk about Kleya and Luthen together, and then we'll kind of finish up on Luthen. I really want to go, I kind of want to anchor the show on the incredible speech that was given to us by Luthen towards the very end of season 1, right? The infamous speech that we all know now. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of reflect on that speech. And now that we know what that character has been through in the course of their life, how much of that really kind of hits home. Because as I was reading it and watching that scene, things started popping into my head from season 2, or just, some of the flashbacks that we were getting, some of the things that he said, some of the decisions that he's made. It all makes perfect sense. And I love the way those two are tied up together. So that's kind of the structure of the show. But let's open up with Kleya. Kind of what we've done typically is, I've asked you, like, what are some of the words that come to mind when you think of Kleya, a character who, by the way, really wasn't a huge standout for me in season 1.
Right.
And just came back and killed it in season 2. And a lot of that is attributed to Tony Gilroy just saying, look, we really thought she did a great job, Elizabeth Dallal, and they wanted to write more in for her in season 2. And so some of that was kind of, she did that herself, right? She brought that upon herself in the best ways. But yeah, I mean, a character that really, really stood out in season 2 as having so much more depth, and an incredible performance by Elizabeth Dallal as well. But I guess what words that come to mind, I guess, when you think of her now, having seen both seasons?
Oh, man. It's funny. There are a lot of the words that I relate to Luthen. I kind of equate to her as well, especially, but you're right. What we saw in season 1, I mean, she was pretty cold. She was a bit heartless in many ways. She was very driven, very focused on what the actual outcome would be. And she was really that driving force, I think, behind Luthen. And she was the one really pushing him to that motivating factor. And we really needed the flashback that we got in season 2 to really make sense of all of the why.
Yep.
And why he acts the way he does, and why she responds to him in the way, and mostly between their dynamic here of how that works out. And it was just so necessary. We didn't know we needed it. We talked about the end of, like, going into season 2, that Kleya was kind of a sleeper character that might really need something who could really take over the show in a very positive way, or really add something to it. But yeah, those are kind of the key words I would continue to do, because she was very consistent, I think, as well. Like, she was the one person who always had that end goal in mind, and that just relentless pursuit of what she felt was, at the end of the day, kind of vengeance, I guess, in a word.
Yeah.
Any other words stand out to you?
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the fact that a lot of what we see, the characteristics of her are very similar to what we get from Luthen, and that would be expected, since he pretty much groomed her, if you want to call it that. That was her mentor, and so you would expect some of those attributes to kind of trickle down into her and her personality, and we definitely saw that. I like the consistency there. You could see the influence of Luthen Rail. So a lot of these words I would use I guess interchangeably, but definitely somebody who was calculated, very cunning at times, very stoic at times, understood the greater mission at hand, right? Wasn't willing to make sacrifices for the small gains versus playing that long game. She was kind of like that communications expert, right? She was the one that really kept everybody in constant contact. She was kind of that focal point, that touch point for the fledgling rebellion that Luthen was trying to start up, even though he may not have been calling it that at that time. And then just kind of fierce is another one, that she was just a fierce kind of character that stuck by her guns, not literally, but figuratively, and just, didn't give a lot really when she could have, right? She didn't let her personal feelings or emotions get in play. Again, a lot of this, you could think I'm just talking about Luthen, but these were definitely big characteristics of her that stood out. And she stands out as a character in Star Wars that, I don't know, like the follow-up question was this, was whether or not we had seen another character like her, I mean, certainly a lot of these qualities you could, Leia comes to mind when you think a lot of these qualities, but definitely there's some differences there in just the way they went about it. I mean, there was, I don't want to steal any talking points from you, but are there any of the characters, I guess, in Star Wars where you felt like, we're seeing glimpses of another character, or this could be a mirror of another character that we've had so far?
I really don't think so. What was interesting is neither one of us used the word angry to describe her at all, even though that was probably what was simmering below the surface the entire time.
And she started that way as a child, right? She was very, very angry.
Yeah, and we get some of that, I think, in season 2 behind the scenes material, but not necessarily on screen, which I think is a testament to, like, keeping that kind of flat line, right? So when I was thinking about what characters would that even remind me of, there were just very few, because you see emotional outbursts from most of them. And actually, of all of the characters that I would equate her to, is almost like Crosshair in a certain way, at least that really even steel attitude. Now, Crosshair didn't have all of the trauma that goes with it, at least a very different type. And maybe he kind of recognized and realized a lot of it later and didn't, sit in it and live with it every single day for most of his life. Maybe we haven't really done a Crosshair breakdown, but maybe but just that stoicism, I think, that goes with it. And I even hesitate to say stoicism a bit, but at least just that really even keel approach to everything where you're just unflappable, I guess, in a word. And that was about the only character I really could come to mind that just didn't seem to be fazed by anything that was thrown at them and still want to achieve the goal and keep the goal in mind at the end of the day. Did anybody come to anybody that was really pinpoint, not carbon copy, but man, yeah, they have a lot of similarities. Anybody jump out to you in that way? Am I just missing someone?
No, I mean, I think you said it well. She is a very unique character. Definitely a character the likes that we haven't seen before. There are characteristics of her that certainly cross over into other characters, but I don't know that we've had anybody that's fit this kind of mold or archetype in Star Wars. I can think of characters probably outside of what I hadn't thought about it, so don't put me on the spot. But I mean, we've seen characters like this in other franchises, right? Other IPs. One thing you did bring up too, just to kind of go back to the anger problem of it, she does feel like, when we first meet her, she's very angry for a lot of right reasons. And we understand where that's stemming from. Everything from, her family being decimated and killed by the Empire to, witnessing a child of her own age being murdered, essentially, because the Empire wanted to find that sniper, right? One of the flashbacks here. But it's really, I think, the kind of that pivotal point, that watershed moment is when Luthen pulls her to the side and says, bottle this up, right? You need to release this later on when we're ready, not now, that kind of thing. Because she was ready to go back and burn everything down, fight everybody, right? And he knew that it wasn't the time, that they had a long road ahead of them, a lot of planning that needed to go into before she could have that revenge that she wanted, before she could have the freedom and the resistance to the oppression. He knew that was the long game, and that's what he was trying to instill in her. And I think that comes from her. And so by the time we get to, modern day version of her, she's already bottled that up. She's taken Luthen's advice and done exactly what he's asked her to do.
She was kind of the perfect student, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. And there's I know they liken that relationship. I know we're kind of already bleeding into this, but they liken that relationship to, if you ever seen Paper Moon, it's an old 1980s movie that's filmed in black and white, although it was filmed in the 80s. And it's about a bank robber who takes on this small child. And it's very similar to The Professional and other stories that you see where someone, usually it's the stereotype is it's a man who takes on this smaller girl who's impressionable, and they both learn from each other. And I think that's kind of what we got here. But there's a lot of that in that in that relationship. They are that character, that smaller character, the child character is very, very much primed to be molded into whatever, figure that older one wants, whether it's himself or, again, grooming them into be something else. Definitely was right for the taking, given everything that she had gone through, her background and the trauma that she had suffered. Yeah, she was very vulnerable and very susceptible to a lot of the influence that Luthen Rail gave her. So, or bestowed upon her, I guess. Okay, so we've talked about her character, some of the words, I guess, that stick out to us, the characteristics. How would you summarize her journey from season 1 to season 2? And I think it's probably a big leap, and I say that only because she was there. Here's my assessment: she was there in the background. It was just very intriguing, right? That relationship was very intriguing because we didn't know where that was, what was predicated upon there, what their relationship really was. But she didn't really have any big moments. She had some moments, and it was certainly, she was a great character, but nothing like we got in season 2. So did you feel like that was much of a leap, or it was even a suspension of disbelief to see that she would be that kind of a character? Or do you think it was just the circumstances that came up in season 2 that allowed that character to surface in the way we hadn't seen in the first season?
Well, from season 1 to season 2, I mean, I think I thought it was actually fairly gradual. I mean, she was very much the taskmaster, kept him on the straight and narrow. Hey, don't deviate now. Don't get cold feet now. She was really that driving force, but we started to see those roles reverse just a touch, where the humanizing element of that, Kleya starts to realize that, okay, we are now on uncertain ground and the target is starting to zero in on us, right? And it was interesting back in season 1, he's asking her about the go bag and stuff, and we kind of finally see that in season 2, of course, where she really is ready to go, and when something does happen and they need to move, so to speak. But it was interesting because it didn't feel like a huge shift, even though because it was just so gradual. And I think it's a testament to some of the writing and then the way that they portrayed the character, because she was just able to kind of step through each of those as they go and not panic. She was always the one that was very steady as you go. And I like that consistency with the character. She wasn't starting to panic. She wasn't starting to act out of sync with whatever was going on. She took the necessary risks she had to make, but she just had a lot more screen time to be able to show you what she was truly capable of, and all of the things that were happening in season one that were all behind the scenes effectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the things that we didn't see. And we saw the confrontation between her and Vel in season one, but you start to see why she was keeping those people at arm's length. We'll talk a little bit about some of her relationships here in a minute, but I think some of that journey, we don't necessarily have to see her move off the mark. If anything, we see her come a bit more full circle in some ways of burn the world down, but then also that vulnerability of, well, what's next? Like, we accomplished what we set out to accomplish, but now she's alone and we don't know what to do. And seeing her have that uncertainty, but also opportunity maybe in some way of like, what else might be next now that you don't have to live this way anymore. Things that you set in motion are there, but just the arc in general, it felt a lot more subtle to me than it did abrupt in any kind of way, or really like it deviated a huge amount for me.
Yeah, I should choose my words a little bit better there. I don't know that I don't think I meant it to be abrupt in a way. It just was surprising that character was under the surface, given we didn't really see a lot of that bubble up in season one. There was and I would agree with
there was so much to there was so much to establish in season one.
Yep.
That I think it was really tough to also establish her more so than Luthen, because Luthen was more the primary of those two characters, and she was the kind of the supplemental and the support side of that. But I was very happy to see them come a bit more even par when he starts to slide a little bit or have to make some of those other calls. Like, she's the one that's actually right there, and you see more of that partnership. I thought it was really great to be able to see that.
Yeah,
more so than season one.
You just touch on exactly what I was going to say. I second everything you said about her as far as her transition from season one to season two. But then on top of that, we did get to see her kind of, she's the one that's saying, look, you're slipping, right? When she felt like he was making mistakes. She seemed to be the constant, right? As war went on, as time went on, as he got older, it started, I think in her mind, she was feeling like Luthen is starting to kind of lose a little bit of this, right? He's starting to venture off into dangerous territory and being maybe too trustworthy at times and not really being where they've always been consistently, what's allowed them to stay alive. And she calls him out on that, right? She was more of the constant. You and I had talked about, as we were breaking down season one and season two, about who was really pulling the strings. Like, was she like the boss of all of this? And in a lot of ways, that turned out to be the case. She was kind of quarterbacking a lot of this stuff. She was kind of, again, that focal point. Even though Luthen was maybe more the decision maker, she was certainly the organizer and the one that put everything in place for it to happen. Everything from, the hidden microphone that was down there to, I'm assuming she was doing a lot of the logistical stuff, right? Getting Andor where he needed to go, et cetera, et cetera. So
she was definitely running the operation from a certain perspective.
Exactly. Yep. So, so in that regard, it was good to see more of that side of her, and knowing that, Luthen probably couldn't do all of this on his own. And that he had somebody like Kleya who was as strong as she was to kind of fill in the gaps where he needed her. So the other, so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but let's just talk about the very end of season two. She ends up on Yavin, and for all intents and purposes, she's kind of like a stranger in a strange land. Yeah. One, she's there amongst a lot of people that, her life's work is right there in front of her eyes, and at the same time, everyone has this kind of, I would say negative appeal to her, or negative perception of her because of Luthen Rael and what he'd done. And so it is kind of weird for her to be there. The only persons that she really had as kind of a point of contact were, of course, Andor, but then Vel was like one of the girls in season one when they were really going at each other, right? And to find out, to come full circle now, here we go, fast forward 4 years later, they're actually bonding, and she's inviting her into her house, and she's like that one person now that she's really probably going to have the most contact with here, the most familiar face of all of them because of everybody else that's here. So I guess the question is, if you want to add anything to that reception that weird, unfortunate reception that she received when she came to Yavin for Andor. Do you think there were Andor? Get that? Andor. Do you think there was, did she play a role in the Rebel Alliance, given her past with Luthen Rail? Because, well, I don't want to. I have a talking point about Luthen Rail, kind of in the same vein. But where do you think she ends up? And do you think we'll ever get stories of her? And I'm not ready to end the topic on her. We've got a couple more things here for her before we segue into the relationship between both.
Yeah, though I think there was a certain bitterness, I think, and a little bitter and a little bittersweet, I think, for Kleya going to Yavin and seeing what they built, but also, that animosity that's there and the distrust between the sides. And I think her perspective of not understand, like, don't they understand what we've been doing? Like, her and Luthen have been doing this entire time and how important it was. And the one thing that they hung on to and continued to be those outsiders for while kind of architecting a lot of this stuff in a lot of different ways. Why would I want to be here with these people who don't respect him and at least don't appreciate like what we've actually put in front of them to be able to accomplish and be able to even have a chance? I mean, we're all drowning. Even still, we're still kind of drowning, but now we at least have an opportunity at the very least. And of course, this last moment, I think that weighs even more heavily on her because she's like, we've literally given everything now. There's nothing left. There's nothing more to give. So I those moments, you always really feel for the character of like, how do you, like, how else would she respond, right? And then what's next for? It was interesting the thing that Vel was always looking for in Luthen, of that father figure, that just some sort of relationship, right? She was just looking for connection, I think, in many ways, Vel. And now Vel is the one extending that to Kleya, saying, hey, this is what's going to save you. This is what's next, right? Now we have each other. Now let me help take care of you and bring you into this, and trust me, it's going to be okay. I was in your shoes once, and seeing that dynamic, potentially grow after this. Now, whether she joins the Rebel Alliance in full force or not, I don't know. Maybe you could see where that's a possibility, but I think also, Kleya has been in this fight for a long time, and that ridge between where the Rebel Alliance is now and what they created with Luthen and her are quite different in how they decided to approach things. And I could see where she's like, you know what, I kind of have done my piece. Like, because almost the conversation with her and Andor, I've kind of done my part. I think it's kind of time for me just to let them run with it from here. I could see her maybe doing that, but I think at the end of the day, she wouldn't be able to sit idle. Like, she still wants to be involved and do something about it all. Yeah.
I think she's got a part to play in the Rebel Alliance. And it's certainly an aspect of the story that I'd love to see them like explore, right? I know it feels like, I don't know. It feels like
you have so many characters now. You're like, oh, we could go and explore all of these three, the people that survived and everything afterwards.
Yeah.
It's like, but we have to go that well again.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it does feel like it's, of course it's in retrospective now that it would feel weird to write stories in with her, but she's fairly young by the time we get to, I think she's supposed to be like 24 or something like that.
It just shows you how good the characters are. I mean, we feel that way because the characters were drawn so well and brought to life so well.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's not out of the realm to say that we couldn't see her pop up later down the road, maybe even into, the Resistance, right? We get to the sequel trilogy, that maybe she has a role there. I can't see her leaving it behind, though. Like, I think there's an adjustment. There's a big adjustment, like you mentioned. I think I like the fact that Vel's here to support her along that way and through that journey. But it's a very different place that she's coming into, given how they operated before and what we know the Rebel Alliance how the Rebel Alliance operates. So, that would be in a really cool story to kind of understand what she does. And, I can't even guess at this point what she would do in either the Rebel Alliance or as part of the Resistance later down the road. But I'd love to see her still be a part of either one of those, if not both, as she continued to get older. Because it really is kind of the last piece of Luthen's legacy, right? She's the last one to kind of carry on all of that and the architecture that went into all that. But more on that in a little bit, I think.
Still got Mon Mothma, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just quickly talking about the relationships. I mean, she didn't really have a lot of relationships per se in season 2. She had a touch point with Lonnie. That seemed like it was really more about getting the microphone or whatever that they had that was hidden there. Anything you want to add on Lonnie? We can talk about Vel a little bit more too.
Yeah, I don't really think there was a whole lot there with Lonnie. Yeah.
What about with Vel? I mean, I mentioned already that it was weird that, to see them come back or to see her kind of be a totally different person to Vel and Vel to be her totally different person to her from what we got in season 1. But anything else you want to add on that relationship? Because that common point between them was Luthen. And both of them, I think, well, maybe more Vel than anybody else, had a very contentious relationship with Luthen at times. I mean, even at the very end, I don't know that she was wholeheartedly, in support of Luthen, given what he had done to, I'm sure she blamed, Vel blamed Luthen for Cinta's death and among other things. So, I don't know. What do you think that was like between both of them?
Yeah, I mean, from a season 2 perspective, it's really difficult to say because we only get kind of those last moments there, and we don't really get a lot of dialogue from Kleya. We get as much from Kleya as we get from Ben Solo, and so. But when you reflect, like on season 1, that was a joke, and you didn't laugh.
I know, I got it.
It's been a while since I've done that one.
Ouch.
But I think with Vel, I mean, it was really important for her. I think that really Kleya had to keep Vel out of Luthen's head because she couldn't have. Luthen was already a little on shaky ground a little bit in season 1. Starting to doubt a little bit paranoid that things were going in the wrong direction. And Vel would have contributed to some of that if she started to be more common with him, right? And I think Kleya, I don't think it was a defensive measure of protecting, well, no, he's kind of my father figure. You can't have him. I think it was more about keeping him focused and on target. So again, I think it was just a very dry, like she purely looking out for Luthen's best interest because him at his best is what was going to achieve what she needed.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying she was using him, but she knew that she had enough faith in that basket that like, this is the way that it's going to work the best. And that's the way that she believed was going to work the best. Anybody else that would interfere with that, she would, and then honestly, she viewed them as tools, and whether she actually felt that way or not, that's how it was portrayed. And I think in those moments, you can kind of understand why, as cold as it is, and so, hence some of the words I used for her, but yeah,
like Lonnie,
I wish we had more. Yeah.
Right. Like Lonnie. Lonnie was essentially a tool to her, right? A means to an end,
sure.
A device.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be curious how some of these relationships started, where they found each other, how they got rolling. I think some of those stories might be interesting to go back and look on. I don't know about a whole book about it or anything like that, but
right.
I mean, like the flashback we got for her and Luthen, I thought was just really amazing. And having small ones like that for other characters would be really cool. Probably nothing we're ever going to get, but those types of ideas of those short stories would be kind of neat to see how they originated.
Yeah. What about Andor? Like that's such an interesting one because at one point, I mean, they were all out to kill Andor, right? I mean, he was a loose end that she wanted to squash, eliminate. I mean, she had a really tough time in season 1. On top of that, just to quickly go back to what we were talking about with her and Vel's relationship. I mean, she called Vel out for being unprofessional, right? Being sloppy. And really was under her skin. And I mean, it felt like at that point, if Vel had made one more mistake, she would have tried to rub her out as well because she was, too risky at times because of her emotions and her relationship with Cinta. But the same thing could be said about Andor and, the risk that existed with Andor out there, knowing who Axis was, knowing who Luthen was, knowing, some of their secrets. She was out to kill him. And then we get to season 2. And of course, there's been a lot that's happened since then, right? We've, years rolled by the time we got to that final episode with them in that. But yeah, by that point, I think she clearly sees, the importance of Andor. She believes in Andor, and he comes to be, the White Knight that rescues her along with, Melshi and K2. But I mean, they're the ones that eventually get her out of there and bring her back to Yavin. I don't know, what do you think about her relationship with him? Do you think she still sees him as that? Do you think she sees him as an equal, as a peer, as a friend? Or is she someone else?
Absolutely not a friend. They've spent no time together to be a friend. So, I mean, he's a means to an end, I think, for her. Now, I think she probably views him as special, like as time goes by, and when he's the one to show up, of course it would be you. Why wouldn't it be you, mm-hmm. right? You're always the one either saving people or showing up on our door to bail Luthen out at the end of the day. So I think for maybe she doesn't want this to be the case, but for all intents and purposes, he's the one consistent in their lives that they've been able to count on, even though he does things his way. He's rebutting the rebellion and the official rebellion now, and that's making things uncomfortable there. There's that animosity, I think, now too, with him defecting effectively and leaving them, although again he continues to come back. So I think there's a certain level of loyalty that she doesn't trust with Andor, but conversely, there's also that sense of loyalty that Andor continues to come back when it matters most. So why wouldn't she? But again, I just don't know if Kleya knows how to have a closer relationship at this point. She's just been so devoid of them for so long. It's been Luthen, and that's really been about it. And even then, it's been a mission. It's been a directive. It's been, contention at times. So how does she have close relationships with people? And that's really difficult to see her. I mean, that's a really difficult path for her to start going down now, and see where that would take a really, really long time to be able to achieve.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. Like, as much as I really want to think that she had friends, or that she had, she was starting to see Vel or even Andor as friends or potential allies. Yeah, it's very difficult because she just comes across as someone who's been so fractured and so damaged because of her life and what she's gone through. And, her sense of purpose is really kind of skewed at times. I mean, they're in the fight for the right reasons, but yet her, like Luthen, make a lot of decisions that, really test your morality in a lot of ways, and whether or not that's the right thing to do. And so you think you sense that there's a bit of humanity that's lost in that. And so with that humanity also goes the ability to have relationships or be compassionate or, be a friend in a lot of ways. So it's very difficult. Like even that relationship with, you think about Luthen, let's kind of segue into that at this point.
It's hard to tell if either character have a lot of empathy at this point. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Empathy is that relationship with them even sincere? Right. So without getting it, we'll come back to the whole father and daughter kind of relationship and how that was played. But, there's that moment in there when what he says, like, when I tell you to move, you move. And he said, move. And she kind of smirks, and they have that lighter moment.
Right.
It almost feels like that's about as light as it ever gets, unfortunately. Like, I don't know that they're sitting down and having a good time and at dinner time and, drinking wine and talking and planning things. It just didn't seem like they had that kind of relationship. It was very much focused on the mission. In a lot of ways, that's very sad because I think both of them probably want that. I mean, they're fighting for that for other people, yet they can't have it themselves, which seems like a huge conflict there. But, and so that's my take on it. At times I think, to kind of go back to the father-daughter relationship. I mean, it is Luthen who says that, we'll be father and son whenever it fits us, right? When we need to be, we can be that. But at times they're going to have to be other characters as well. And so there's almost a sense of your own personal self that's lost in that. You don't know who you're playing. He's playing these different roles. I mean, Luthen goes to the extreme of dressing up and really completely drastically changing his persona and his character. And they both do this in a lot of ways, right? They completely lose themselves and who they are. And so they don't ever really come back to that. And so it's very difficult to think that they had a really good, like, father-daughter relationship, but you got to think that at times that certainly was the case. Like, deep down inside, I think she still looked at him as a father figure. I can't imagine any child, even as, someone who's been through a lot of trauma and has been through some really hard, difficult things, seen some difficult things, wouldn't be able to have like a parental figure next to them and really just kind of at times cry into their shoulder or, be vulnerable and ask for things or tell them how they're feeling. I don't think she had like that close a relationship, but I think she wanted to, right? I think there was a yearning there for her as a child to want those things. And so maybe that was enough to kind of keep that there. And maybe it was enough for her to really just say, oh yeah, I've got this, or that relationship does exist, even if it never came to fruition. So I don't know if I'm making sense here, but I have a feeling like there's a hole that was there that was never fulfilled. And she probably fooled herself many times to think that really was the case, that they did have that relationship when she needed it. Otherwise, it felt like it was just very much about the mission and, there was, revenge, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I don't know if I quite agree to that extent, but I think I'm with you to a certain point, though, as I think that she, especially reflecting when she has to, basically kill him, when I think she's having that moment of reflection of looking back, saying he really is the closest thing to a father that she has. And he did a lot of things and he hesitated and he took that ownership on himself, just like when he took the clicker away from her on Naboo, that first explosion, that first terrorist type of act. He couldn't bring it for her to do it because he was trying to spare those pieces of her. And he even tells her as much as his biggest fear is what he's doing to her. And I think she recognizes some of that stuff, either maybe is not as much in some of those moments, but in in reflection of that. And I think she may have a certain appreciation, like that he couldn't really be a father. They couldn't have that kind of relationship given what their fight was, and just stay true to the mission and the work, if you will. But she could reflect and see moments of it where that's what he was and that's what he was doing. And I think there was a certain appreciation that goes along with some of that. And when she's looking at it in hindsight, but again, you can't really linger on it too much because neither one of them, they both know what that starts to draw. This is almost like the attachments conversation with Jedi. They have to keep some level of detachment from one another in order to make these really hard calls if one of them is in the crossfire. And you see Kleya, she doesn't hesitate, right? She doesn't hesitate when she has to take him off the life support machine. She does what's necessary, and then she pauses and kind of watches the rest of the work. It is just like when she is told to, don't look as he clicks the button, but then turn and observe what you've done. And she does something somewhat similar when she disconnects him as well. So, So again, maybe not all the way to, she wanted that father-daughter relationship, but I think she saw where there were pockets of it where they kind of did the best they could given the circumstances they have.
I was just thinking too, this is off the script a little bit, but there's something to be said about the parallels between her and Andor, right? You think about Andor, both of them were kind of thrust into all of this because of the Empire in one way or other, directly or indirectly, right? On 2, they were rescued by someone who, for Andor, it was, of course, Marva, sorry. And then for Kleya, it was Luthen. And they kind of go in very different directions at that point. It's almost sad to see where she ends up versus where Andor. I mean, Andor grows up in a house with a mother figure who absolutely loves him and shares her emotions and feelings, and he's caring for her and that sort of thing. And you've got Kleya, who's living this totally different life, and yet they both end up coming back to kind of like fulfill the same kind of mission in very different ways. But I'm just hadn't really thought much about it, but I wonder if there's more parallels between those two. Growing up and how they both got separated from their parents. But
I think it's interesting. I mean, with Marva, you see where even in her speech at the end of season 1, she was quiet too long. She let things, she sat idle. She didn't push back hard enough. All of those regrets where you see it on the other side of the coin, that's all Luthen and Kleya have done. All they've done is press this agenda to build something that will fight back rather than having to fight back out of necessity or out of lack of planning. And then you see what happens on Rick's Road and things go poorly, and there's just a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah.
Unintentional, well, not even unintentional, but unplanned bloodshed, so to speak. Whereas things like Gorman and others have a lot more structure to them in many ways.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Gorman was at their feet, but just in general.
Right. The I do want to touch on we don't have a lot here, honestly. I'd love to know more about the background. Of course, he's Lear, Sergeant Lear was his name. This is going back to 18 BBY. I'd like to know more about. It sounded like he definitely signed up for this, and he probably flourished in the Empire in a lot of ways. You think about where he's at. I think a lot of the lessons he learned that he applies later in life, unfortunately, came from the Empire. Just the brutality and the lack of consciousness in some of these decisions because of the mission at hand. I think a lot of that did play into who he became later down the road as Luthen Rael. But it's very curious to think about why he decided to have, what was he screaming? Make it stop, make it stop. And then he has that moment where he decides to save Kleya and take her on as as his apprentice, if you will, leaving the Empire. That's all very fascinating stuff. I mean, in some ways, I hope we never find out. But in a lot of ways, I do want to know exactly what was going on there, because it feels like there was more there. Maybe he had a relationship, maybe he had a daughter, and he felt like, he lost it to the Empire, he lost it to the war, or, whatever it was. And so that way, maybe that was the reason why he was so sympathetic to rescuing her. Or, was it just the amount of brutality? I mean, because essentially they were killing and slaughtering all of her people, brutally slaughtering the people in the streets. And that's probably enough for anybody to kind of finally snap and say, what the hell am I doing here? This is not what I signed up for. And this is not at all what I thought, my life would become. And to make that kind of a change right there in that moment and feel like, okay, I've seen some really horrible things, but this one child I'm going to save and, ensure that they don't have that kind of life. And in fact, I'm going to go even further and do something to ensure that these types of atrocities never happen again by this regime, by this empire. I mean, that's a huge kind of shift to go through. Like, I mean, that's a lot of change to go through in that one moment. So it feels like there had to be more that led up to it. And it would be very interesting to see and understand like what that was like even right afterwards. Like, you know, what did he do with her? How did he keep her hidden for all this time? And, you know, how did he get out of the empire? Right. Lots of questions there. But have you thought about that much or any?
Never underestimate the power of guilt, my friend.
Yeah.
I mean, in the moment, you know, the guilt, and you had to imagine, I think along those lines, though, when you think about what their relationship would have been like in those early days, you can imagine it was probably pretty tough. I mean, because there had to be a ton of anger from her. And yeah, sure, he helped get her out, but also he helped commit the atrocities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that underlying simmering anger at the, not only the giant machine of the empire, but the individuals that do things, right? And then there's no core for those folks. But here's this person who simultaneously did this atrocious thing, or at least was involved with it, even though clearly had a lot of remorse from it. But then he's also effectively her savior. I mean, so how do you reconcile those feelings when you're just around that person all the time? I mean, I can't even imagine, right?
Yeah.
So it's so difficult. But I think the power of guilt in particular is a powerful thing when you're trying to atone for what you did. And then I think he's trying to atone for it every single day. And we see, I mean, this is kind of, you know, going into Luthen, but you kind of can't talk about one without the other anyway, right? You know, with Luthen, he needs to do these things. And I think he's doing them. I think as many of the things, especially when I rewatched some of the season 1 stuff, I think there was as much of him, you could read into it that he was doing this stuff to protect Kleya and to help Kleya. If you put it through that lens, it makes total sense and it works of why he's hesitating. And is this good enough? You know, and the things that we get in the flashback really just corroborate that. I think really strengthen that position of why he's feeling so uneasy about things falling apart, and that it's just on this precipice, and that sense of failing Kleya, that all the things I've promised you that we'd be able to do and be able to tear this behemoth down, I'm going to fall short of, and I'm not going to be able to do it. But as we see in the flashback, she's the one deriving all of that force too. But
yeah,
all comes from that guilt, though. I think if he's always needing to prove himself, you know, to Kleya, that I'm not that monster that you maybe first saw. That when you hear all the screams that he was having a breakdown by, here's this 6 or 7 year old, or however old she was really young, and hiding, that these people are going to, you know, massacre her too.
Do you think he was wrong for what he did? For Luthen to take a child like this and kind of mold her into this, I don't know, I'm not going to call her a killer, but I mean, she was radicalized, right? I mean, let's just call it what it is.
Well, I mean, she was radicalized by the situation, I think, over in, like, to begin with, right? She'd already started forming an opinion, but certainly you could make that argument for the rest of her life that there were opportunities to do something different he didn't do. So, I mean, yeah, you would lay that at his feet. He's the adult, right? So
yeah,
he had that. He took that responsibility on himself and decided that that's what they would do. Now, maybe she didn't want to leave. This is where we don't have the context for that. You know, I think to your point before, we don't really know what the dynamic of that relationship looked like when she was younger in those first 2 or 3 months, right? In particular, probably.
I could see them coming back to that. That would be interesting to kind of just have a side story. You know, maybe it's a comic, maybe it's a book, I don't know, whatever, but just those years leading up to Andor and that relationship and seeing some of that, you know, the strife and the conflict that exists, because at some point, I mean, she's a kid, and I just, you know, you think about these things, you know, in your own personal lives. I mean, that stuff's going to surface, and kids aren't used to being in those situations. It's like Lord of the Flies, right? If you ever read that book and seeing how awful they can become and things that they do, and just the nature of, you know, not growing up or not having like parental figures or being guided in the right direction. You know, you got somebody like Luthen who, God, I mean, I don't know what he was doing to her at the time. And I just meant like,
nature versus nurture, man. I mean,
yeah.
it's tried and true, and it's very evident, you know, how this stuff works out. That she came out as adjusted, if you want to call it adjusted, as well as she did.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's that singular focus, right? They just always, this is what your goal is, and that's what I think. For all of Luthen's faults, you could say maybe he got that one thing right of really keeping her focused and on target after all these years.
You know, after doing the show notes for this, I went back and watched that final scene. I called it murder. I don't know if that's really the right term, essentially it's what it is. I mean, that's, he was there, but I mean, it was probably mercy killing, if nothing else. I mean, he was being kept alive by a respirator and machinery. I mean, it was only seconds after she disconnected all that he died. So who's to say that he was really even alive? But
right, only to be tortured when they got around to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it was very, very difficult to watch because she does such a great job. Again, Elizabeth Delisle does such a great job in that scene. I love the fact that you brought up where she had to kind of just watch it, even though everything in her body told her not to look at that, because that was, horrifying to watch somebody like that just die in front of their eyes. But that was a very difficult scene to watch. It's a very powerful scene, given everything that happened and just the resolve and the commitment that she had making her way up there. I mean, she was determined. I mean, a lot of it's coming from the look. He's, of course, that they get a hold of him, right? The mission's failed at that point, right? I get that part of it. But the other part of it too was that there was probably something in her that was saying, look, he can't, if he is alive, they're going to make things even worse for him, right? So it was incumbent upon her to take action and ensure that, not only did they not get the secrets, but then, he has a kind of a mercy killing, or, whatever this, he's found peace in some way. But
right.
a very difficult scene to watch. But anything on Luthen's sacrifice, which we haven't really talked about. I mean, I guess we can talk about it in just a second when we talk about Luthen, but the fact that he was, he killed himself at first thinking this was the end. And then of course, Kleya having to come in and kind of clean that up at the very end there.
Yeah. I mean, this is the agreement you make, right? If you're not sure, I think she may have gone to the hospital to try to save him, right? Is he wounded? Like, she didn't have much information, right? All she saw was the ambulance, flying away and then the reports, but she wasn't sure how grievously injured he was. So I think she probably went there with the intent to save, but when she saw him, she knew there was only one course of action, and that was to preserve and protect. And I think also to not have him be tortured, but also preserve and protect the mission, and then have your moment to feel, go through some of that, and then bolt.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a very, very powerful sequence for two very morally conflicting characters to think about when you think about how how do I respond to this situation? Yes, I'm sad because he was really trying hard, and they're trying to overthrow this regime, but at the same time, how they're doing this is we would usually equate to terrorist type of acts, right? And it feels those very conflicting feelings of, we're on the right side, but are we doing it the right way? And you've got these moments where these characters have to make that hard decision in a more personal manner. And I mean, but she doesn't hesitate. She's the one that doesn't hesitate. I guess you could say that with Luthen too, with Lonnie. I mean, he didn't hesitate to put a bullet in his chest. So.
Yeah.
That was probably more painful than like her putting Luthen down. Because with Luthen, you kind of make sense, right? With Lonnie, with Lonnie, you're like, oh man, there was probably a path here, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I don't think there was, but
no,
we
not
talked
for
about
him.
that. We talked about it in the breakdown, but anyway, so I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, no, you did. Well, let's talk about Luthen next. And I guess, are there any other words that you would use to describe Luthen that are different from Kleya?
He was more duplicitous, I think. And he, by default, he had to be. He was the face of this side of the rebellion, so to speak. Mm-hmm. He was the one that was slightly more public. He was the one making connections with Mon Mothma. He was the one taking some of those risks along with Mon Mothma in different ways. But also, he had to be the cleanup guy, right? And so he had to be the one to make the tough calls and to not hesitate. So he was that. He was almost like that father figure, right? We kind of look to that in our traditional families, at least, or the families that you and I probably grew up. Many of them were very male centric in that way, and the dad's got to be the one to make the hard calls. I know this is not every family, by the way. I'm not advocating for this, but that was kind of that mentality of, he took that on himself. He took that role on as the kind of the decision maker and the one that had to make these really difficult calls when it mattered most to keep everybody else clean. So I can't think of I just couldn't come with the right word of like, how do I protect everyone around me? Like, he's protecting Mon Mothma, he's protecting Kleya, he's protecting the rebellion. He's just doing, he's just a protector in many ways. And it may not seem like it all the time, but when you kind of peel back the layers, it's what he's doing. He's protecting the rebellion baby, but he's also protecting everyone around him. So a protector, maybe we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. There's almost a sense of cavalierness, like being cavalier, but not in the like traditional sense, right? Not in the chivalrous sense.
Well,
But
and no bravado that goes with
Right,
it too.
exactly.
He says, I mean, you've got the speech we're going to talk about here. He expects no thanks. There's no thanks for any of that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, I had manipulative as a word. Like we didn't really get to see that much in Kleya, but Luthen like was all over that. I mean, he was definitely manipulating people at any given point whenever he needed to. I wrote that he was also a little bit more cautious about things. I don't know if that was the right word either. I couldn't think of a word where, I mean, it was almost like a cautious paranoia kind of feel at times. And that seems right on par. You would expect that to happen. Definitely zealous. He definitely felt like an anti-hero in a lot of ways,
Very
right?
much so,
Just kind of almost there to becoming a hero, but at the same time doing things that, in your mind and your heart don't feel are not right. But yet you can't deny, the results and the outcome, right? It's not the way we'd go about it, but he certainly got results. And I felt like he was conflicted a lot too. It conflicted in the sense that he was on this mission of revenge, right? Going back to the speech, talking about all the things that he was doing, all the sacrifices he was making, everything that he was putting for, other people and to live a life without the Empire. And yet at the same time, he got no kind of gratitude, even when in death, right? Even in death, Andor comes in is like, did any of you know him? Right. You guys, you haven't sacrificed even I'm paraphrasing here, where he's talking about, a fraction of what he gave up. Right. Even in death, he still wasn't getting anything. And so I feel like there was probably a conflict there at times where he felt like, what am I even really doing all this for? There's no one's appreciating this. And it's probably easier just to lay down and allow all these things to happen. Or, he had an opportunity to get in probably with the higher ups and schmooze the Imperials the way he was doing at some of these high end parties and that sort of thing. There probably was an opportunity to join the Empire, but that really wasn't in the cards for him, of course. So I felt like there was a lot of conflict there and just a lot of strife internally with him and his mission, and maybe not always seeing. I mean, he never got to see the end of it all, which goes back to his speech. I mean, he called it, right?
Yeah. And again, shares so many of the same words we use for Kleya, very driven and focused and all that, of course, too.
He does say something too that really, again, this is not really an adjective for him, but he has a line in season 1 where he says, if you're not willing to risk your consciousness, then surrender and be done with it. He's talking to Mon Mothma when she's suddenly scared. And that line really encapsulates a lot of what we see characteristically from both Luthen and from Kleya, right? Mm-hmm. If you can't bear your consciousness, then get out of here. Like there's no need for you to be here. We're not going to get anywhere without that happening, without you, turning a blind eye or closing a blind eye or whatever.
Well, that willpower has to be there to where you're willing to stomach some of the harder truths that you're going to have to live with.
Yeah. I want to talk just quickly about it's mostly about Luthen, but at the same time, Kleya is a part of it because of how much she kind of orchestrated here. But I do feel like it's probably not talked about enough, but they are kind of like the architects of the Rebel Alliance. They are, and maybe architect's not the right word. Maybe it's more like a precursor or forerunner, right? Or the words that they would use. I mean, they laid down they did a lot of the hard stuff. So, the rebellion could, do I'm gonna call it easier things. They made a lot of the hard decisions, but in essence, do you think they started down this path? I mean, at some point I feel like he was like, okay, this isn't going to work. We can't live like this forever where we're constantly splintered and all that. Luthen never felt like he was going to be that person, right? He wasn't the uniter of those groups. That of course came from Mon Mothma and to some extent Bail Organa. But do you think he ever saw that as like the future vision of, hey, I'm laying down a lot of what I know is going to be needed, which is this Rebel Alliance to really kind of take over the Empire? Or do you feel like he was still playing this game of like, hey, we're just going to continue to hit them and be a nuisance to them and hit them in the pocketbooks and take down ships and, that sort of thing, but never really make any progress? Because it felt like Kleya was probably seeing that more than him. Maybe had that in the longer sights than he did, but I don't know. That's probably not fair either.
It's kind of tough to see how they viewed them all together, right? Because you could see where, and I think architect is the right word in many ways. I think we were talking like in season 1 with the whole money angle. I think that was something that had to be there. The financing had to be there. It had to be not only brought in, but managed and distributed, and you get it to the right places. Who should be in and who should be out. I mean, the stuff with Saw Gerrera, of course, and the challenges there, and even he's on the outs with Saw in many ways. So, I think architect is a decent word for it. I think, at least in pockets of it, maybe not the entire thing, but I think he probably also viewed this as there's a lot of pieces and pockets that are going to be developing. I mean, they're a clear example of that. There's other examples across the galaxy. Something does have to bring them all together at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And finding that person is where that's going to be critical of who has not only the willpower and the fortitude for it, but also the right compassion and the right capacity to be able to bring people that are going to have very different approaches to this, himself included, but then also be okay with not being involved with any of that, knowing that he still has his own part to play, and it's going to be this more of an operative, I think, at the end of the day, is where he ended up kind of sliding into. And I think that was really difficult. Like, when he was working with Mon Mothma, I was like, from Mon Mothma, I was like, you're telling me to build this thing, but yet you keep doing these things, like you're kind of helping us, but then you operate totally independent of everything. So how does that work? And that's what pisses the rebellion off.
Yeah.
And why they're so irritable with him by the end of season 2. So this is really kind of fun dynamic of how all that fits in play. And, the ones who set it up are sometimes the ones who are a bit ostracized from it, but also truly never give up on being the ones that have to go do the dirty deeds to keep everybody else clean. Again, it kind of goes back to that protector mentality as well.
Yeah. And this is probably more of an observation than an analysis, but although we can make it an analysis, if you think about the 3 different players and all this, right? You've got the Rebel Alliance later down the road. And then you've got Saw Gerrera and you've got Luthen. So Saw Gerrera, we definitely saw this in season 1 and season 2, and we have books and other things to references, but he was trying to grow a network. Now, granted, once you got into the network, man, I mean, it was, there a sense of paranoia was all around you, because if you made any bad moves, I mean, he was kind of crazy. You didn't know if he would kill you off because he thought maybe you were betraying him or a traitor. Right. But he was growing a network, right? He was trying to do something and knew that he had to hit bigger and harder. And in order to do that, he needed to accumulate more ships and more people to, do more missions and that sort of thing. The same thing can be said about the Rebel Alliance. They knew that they weren't going to be able to overtake the Empire with just, the small fractured groups of people, that they were going to have to coalesce and become a larger kind of cohesive unit. Then you look at Luthen, and at least from what we got in Andor, like, he never really grew his network. You know what I mean? He had Andor that was working for him. He had Kleya, he had Cinta at one point. He had, of course, Vel, but we have no, I mean, again, unless this was something out there, or there was more out there that, yet to be told. It felt like he was just kind of operating with this very small group. And a lot of that stems from that paranoia, right? When you think about the difference, when you look at let's fast forward to Yavin and the way they were trying to put in processes to ensure that they knew who was coming and going, because of the same reason. They were trying to solve for what Luthen couldn't solve, what could never wrap his head around. Is I can't grow the circle. The more people that we bring in, the greater risk we have of somebody being, betraying us, or, them finding out who we are, or we're going to have to go kill other people. It was just a very different kind of mentality. And so when I mentioned earlier that he never really, saw, he never was really trying to solve for all the splintered groups, because I don't think in his mind that was the right thing to do. I think he was probably content, or certainly content, or at least just passive, in the sense that he was going to just operate the way he had been for so long, with the people that he knew, with the people that he trusts. He kept his circle very close. And unfortunately, that was never going to be a recipe for overthrowing the Empire.
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts there. I think his network was larger than what we saw, because again, he also had contact with Bix as well. Vel and them, while he may not have done it directly himself, his operatives were kind of doing that for him, right? They were Vel was out there on Aldhani, bringing people together and all of that too, right? So I think they were growing it in pockets where it wasn't just him. I think we also have to remember he was in the Lion's Den too. So to your point, him being in Coruscant, to make sure that he's got the right hooks in the right places, and building what we would maybe equate to more of an intelligence type of agency in some ways, of having the right moles in the right places and being able to lean on them, and that accessibility of it. he has to insulate himself quite a bit, right? He can't branch out and be the one-to-one contact. That's why it was such a risk for him to go and see Andor in the first place. And it really irritated Kleya back at season 1. So he's got to protect that because he's the one that set up shop in not the backyard of the Empire, like in the Empire. This is where I operate, and being able to do it's a very bold move. It's one of those hide in plain sight type of things. But at the
so you're
same
saying he was
time,
confined in a lot of ways there to grow.
intentionally, though, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think intentionally, he was able to grow in other ways through the folks that he trusted the most to be able to connect with. But I think that's where Kleya would step in too, with like Vel of like, you can't make direct contact like this because we need to keep some sort of separation, because if they track us back here, like so many things fall apart because they can go and find all the spider web. So how do we limit the spider web? So if they find some, they don't find all. But you know, the more you do that, that's why it started kind of falling apart in season 2 a little bit as they start to unwind some of that. But I think for Luthen, it was really critical to say, okay, who is on our side that has influence and power, and then who are the people that may be on our side that are that we can influence, that are in the right places to give us information and intel. I think that's where Luthen, and then who are the right people to kind of bring it all together for us. And that's where Andor and Vel and others like that kind of come into play, I think.
Yeah. So here's another, this one's in the notes, sort of. I don't want to surprise you, but
Hey, I love surprises.
I know. But when you think about, so let's go back to the Saw Gerrera discussion real quick. I mean, what sets Luthen apart from Saw Gerrera? I think in season 1, we saw them kind of, you know, I would say they were kind of level in a lot of ways. They certainly had the same kind of motives and were thinking on the same lines. I mean, they were working together to some extent, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
By the time we get to season 2, it feels like they've kind of veered off into kind of separate directions. And a lot of that is just Saw Gerrera and his craziness and, you know, all that, of course. But I mean, in a lot of ways, they are the same, and there's not much that separates them. You know what I mean?
It was funny. I was actually thinking about this when I was rewatching some of the stuff. I'm like, man, how are they different? And I think Luthen tells us how they're different. And I think it's when he's talking to Kleya, you had mentioned this towards the top of the show, like what she does with her hate. And so that's what he does with his. He bottles it up. He tries to bring it so it's available when he needs it to be, so he can lean into it, where I think Saw Gerrera just wears it on his sleeve. I mean, it doesn't seem to have a rhyme or reason. He's willing just to hit things hard and fast to make a point. He's very brash, very, you know, honestly, he's looking for appreciation and things like that, or recognition, but he kind of is in many ways. And he wants to be that man of action, right? He doesn't he doesn't have the patience and the tolerance for the longer game, because he could just, it's better to burn out than to fade away type of mentality, it almost seems. And I think that's the dichotomy between them, even though fundamentally, I think where you were going is probably accurate. Of fundamentally, they're all trying to accomplish kind of the same things, and Luthen doesn't have the moral quandaries that the Rebel Alliance does of, hey, let's not hit civilian outposts. He doesn't want to hurt civilians, but you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs type of mentality. Like sometimes people are going to be collateral damage, but he has a little more regard for life than maybe Saw Gerrera does, who just goes in guns blazing and, hey, if people die, they die, you know? So I think there's a little bit to differentiate. I think it's more of their philosophy of it, maybe less so than maybe the actual actions that they take day in and day out.
Yeah. No, I would agree. You know, the end result is probably the same. How they get there is very different. The steps that they take to get there are very different. The way they lead is very different.
I think Luthen's looking for very precise, I think, and more precision in how they...
Yeah, he's more calculated.
That's a great way of putting it, yeah. Yeah, where Saw has moments of that, but the execution is usually pretty sloppy.
Yeah. So don't do drugs. I mean, the guy's always high, so what do you expect?
Yeah, he's high on that Rido, baby.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about like Gorman, right? When he tells Andor that it's going to burn brightly, right? If all that kind of goes down.
Yeah.
You almost get a tint of like excitedness about it. You know what I mean? Like this is exactly what he needs, right? He understands that some of these things, unfortunately, or maybe not even unfortunately to him, some of these things just have to happen. It's the cost of doing war. He
knows how significant it would be.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And at the same time, I mean, not to draw parallels, so like Deidre Merrow, but she's the one that is she comes out and says, look, she needs the Gormans to do the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, he's acting on behest of the Empire to accomplish kind of the same goals, right? And so in that sense, it does kind of make him again more of the anti-hero. Certainly aligns him with Saw Gerrera and just the execution or the end result and wanting the end result to be the same. But at the same time, like, when you think about, like, I felt like I was rooting for Luthen. Like, I like the character. I wanted him to be successful. Yeah, I didn't agree with everything he did. I don't know that I can say that about Saw Gerrera. Like, I like the character in the sense that he's crazy, but I mean, there's nothing. I don't ever root for Saw Gerrera. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Right.
a very key distinction there between the two characters, and so, it is an interesting. We could probably spend more time on that, but I know we're getting pretty long here on the tooth on this one.
It's interesting when you say Rue. I could hear Rutini kind of rolling around and shouting at us a little bit.
Oh, I
here.
know. Yeah,
Because the character is, and I think justifiably so. And when you look at Star Wars and kind of what Star Wars represented under George Lucas with the original trilogy, I think in particular, the way that some of these characters behave and the story elements of it, while I think very compelling and actually very real world, they kind of challenge our way of, like, how do we view the franchise, I think, in a certain capacity as well. But I think it's that realism that you could take something of why they're doing this isn't wrong, and it's kind of for the right reasons, but the way that we have to go about, or the way that they choose to go about it, you could argue whether they have to do it this way or not. But what do you do when you're desperate? What do you do whenever you feel like you had to start from level 0 and you've seen the atrocities firsthand? I mean, it's a tough thing to go through when you look at it in kind of in totality about whether we like it or not. And I think that's the idea, is the dilemma of these characters, and that they have to make these choices around what's the best way to accomplish what we need to do, and how much do I care about what that costs to get there? Because they've literally, if I'm these characters, I've literally given you everything that I have, even though you don't know it. And some people are going to take advantage of this, and so on and so forth. So it's the dilemma and the conflict that I think make them interesting. And so rooting for a Luthen, I don't know if I would maybe go that far individually, but I see where you're coming from, though, of it's a character that you want to succeed because you see how much it means to them. And, we at least have an idea of some of the reasons why they need this to go this way, and why they would go to such extremes to do it. And I think when you take it back, you look at that layer of, he wants to do this for Kleya in many ways. It almost kind of breaks your heart a little bit, and I hate to humanize terroristic type of activities, but there's a story behind everything, right? And that's the part that it's sometimes really difficult to hear, because it really it confuses us as to how I feel about this situation. What they're doing is wrong, but did they really? The villains are not born; they're made, type of thing, right?
Yeah, and that at the heart of it, that is exactly what Lucas set out to do, right? I mean, back in 1977, when this concept of the rebels, he was talking about
Darth Vader, yeah.
And Darth Vader, right? He was talking about, of course, the Vietnam War and all that, and who were the real good guys there, and that sort of thing, the morality of it all. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Luthen is a character who has noble intent, but the steps that they take and the process that they take aren't always things that we can certainly align with, in our real lives. But
now, Darth Vader just doing it all for himself, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, he's selfish, absolutely selfish.
Yep, glad we agree.
Okay, so this question feels a little bit loaded, but it's the question of what Luthen's legacy will be. Does he even have a legacy at this point? You know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh, what's his legacy? And I started thinking about it. Who's left to tell it? Yeah. Exactly. Who's left to tell it? Well, and it could be somebody like, I think Andor would have been a good choice. Like, had he lived, he probably would have been one, especially since we saw the passion in that meeting room where he was, again, going back to where he talked about how, he made all these sacrifices, and he made a, these guys they didn't know him, that kind of thing. I can see him being that one that's petitioning and certainly making the case for Luthen and how they needed to appreciate him. Maybe down the road, if Andor had lived, they name a ship after him, or they name a rebel base after him, or something, right? To that extent. That, of course, never happens because Andor doesn't live through all of that. And so really you're left with Wilmon, who probably is the strongest one of them all to make a case for it, because he was the one that was championing a lot of things. He was sticking up for him when people were talking bad about him back on Yavin. We don't really know a lot about that relationship that existed, just because we had to fast forward through some of the years. But outside of Wilmon, you've got Kleya and you got Vel. I don't know that Kleya and Vel are going to be two people that are going to be speaking up for him in that same kind of fiery passion that you might get from an Andor or from a Wilmon. But even still, like, let's say none of them ever step forward. It's hard for people like, for me, to think that people like Mon Mothma, even though as close as she was in the relationship that she had with him, and certainly like Bail Organa or anybody else that had any kind of like tangible relationship with him, would actually sit there and put him on a pedestal and say, look, this guy did some amazing things for us and we need to recognize him and honor him. I can't see them doing that. Like, it just feels like they understand that, yes, they couldn't have done this without him, but to make him a martyr or to glorify him, through some kind of and glorify his legacy, that seems like a far stretch for those characters. And so, as sad as it is, it's going to segue nicely into the final piece here when we talk about his speech. That's exactly what he was saying, right? He's got nothing. He's doing all this and he knows he's not going to get anything from it, or any kind of like recognition. And certainly there's not a legacy that's essentially being left here for him.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if Mon Mothma, I think Mon Mothma is the best one to present any of it, and including the flaws. But you're right. At the end of the day, it would be only the positive stuff, right? A lot of the other stuff would have to be swept under the floor, under the rug about what was, what, in order to preserve the image. This is why they always say the victors write the history books, right? Is that idea of like, okay, well, we want to make sure we present what the rebellion is in a very positive manner, because we need that credibility. We don't want people looking at us like we're already doing shady stuff, or we were built on shady things and the whole thing's a sham. So we have to kind of conveniently put, some of those dirtier moments to the side. And Luthen is one of those people. But he knew it going in, right? I mean, you said we're going to have the speech here in a second. You see that in the speech, and that's why he needs to keep people like Mon Mothma as clean and pristine as possible, right? We need that to be the face, so that she can say without a doubt that she has, while she's made lots of concessions now that we learn more, we're getting some of the books from Alexander Freed and stuff, but someone who at least personifies what freedom should be, what the ideals of rebellion should be, right? That Nemec's manifesto is now circulating around the galaxy, right? We need that to be the voice, but Mon Mothma to be the voice and the face that goes with that manifesto, and they embody what it is. And Luthen, he knew he could never be that, and he knew there was no thanks in that, there was no recognition in it. But over time, these things tend to have more of a realistic, it's just like the Alamo in Texas history, right? We all grew up learning about the Alamo in a certain way, but over time we start to see how really the true history of the Alamo is very, very different and a lot more nuanced in many ways than what we grew up with. And so which one's more compelling, right? It depends on the narrative you want to push. And so at some point, kind of realistic type of things come out, and you start to see characters like Luthen and Kleya show, and you're like, okay, these are really interesting, compelling characters or people that we would want to learn more about. So 30, 40, 50, 100 years later, those stories surface in some way. And maybe he finally gets that moment in the sun, but he's not going to go and have, a Mon Cal cruiser named after him. It's not going to be Rail 1 or something like that, right? So nothing to that extreme, but, it's unfortunate reality, but what he already recognized and understood, though.
Yeah. There was this is part of the segue into that final speech, but there's a Greek proverb that says, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit. I mean, that's a nice way of saying exactly what he says a little bit, right? Or I'm never, I share my life with ghosts, and I wake up to it every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do, kind of thing.
Right.
That's a great a portion of that speech. But I do want to just touch one other thing too that kind of speaks to who Luthen is when he's talking to Dedra. And by the way, we didn't really even touch on that exchange and that relationship that they had there. I mean, we talked a lot about it when we did the episode breakdown. But when he tells her the rebellion isn't here anymore, it's flown away, it's everywhere now. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to disgust you. I mean, those are his last lines before he takes his own life. It is kind of like a big middle finger to her and to the rebellion, or to the Galactic Empire in a lot of ways. But it does feed again into his speech. So I guess, do you, anything else you want to add, or are you ready to kind of jump into all of this?
Yeah, let's just jump into it.
Yeah. So let's, we'll just take it line by line here. He talks about calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. Right. We've talked about this already. Like, I don't know that he has, and he's absolutely right. There's absolutely nothing calm about what he's going through in his life. There's hardly any kindness that he can show to people, or people show to him, outside of, faux kind of kindness because of these personas and these characters that he's created. We talked about kinship, right? The closest thing that we could probably even see would be him and Kleya's relationship. But even you and I had some, I guess some talking points about whether or not that was really even a thing. Like, it was more about a mission. They were probably just two people that were soldiers in this war, and that's about as all they ever got from that. Love, we never saw an instance of that. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, right?
No.
I'd love to think, though, like, again, I'd love to think that he did have this at one point, right? He knows what he's given up, or at least he longed for some of these things. And so that has to be a driving factor for it. So, maybe there's a story to be told there somewhere down the road, but yeah, that last line, I've given up all chance at inner peace. That's his whole life. His whole life has been absolutely chaos, from the moment he wakes up to the moment he goes to sleep. And even if he does sleep, it's absolute pure chaos. Now, he's trying to bring order to that, and he's calculated again and all that, and what he does. But, when you think about, holistically, everything that he's doing, it's a very, very tumultuous kind of, relationship that he has with everyone. And certainly all, what he's trying to do here is just pure chaos. There's nothing peaceful about it.
Yeah. And actually, it's the next two lines, I think, that wrap well into this. And the point I'd like to make is, I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. And I think when you think about sunless space and ghost, I mean, you think about the nightmare of what he experienced on whatever planet they were on, and the atrocities that were going on there when he found Kleya, the screams. You can just imagine that he sees and hears all of that every single night in his dreams, right? And in order to tamp that down, he's got to constantly prove that he's doing something, right? He's not worthy of all of the things that he's taken from other people, or the people that he worked with in the moment. The Empire, silenced all those lives, and they all went straight into him. And he sees them in Kleya every single day, and he can't afford. They took that from them. So why is he worthy of having any of those moments or any of those types of feelings? And it's just not right in his way. And this is what he owes them. This is what he's trying to pay it back, and try to give something back for what he feels maybe potentially responsible for in many ways too. And not that views himself as a big person that's going to give salvation, but he's just a guy trying to atone for what he saw and what he participated in, even by extension, in a moment 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. That sunless space is, I guess referring also to some of those decisions that he's made, those darker decisions that he knows he has to make, that he has made.
Right.
I share my dreams with ghosts. That's an interesting one, because I think during season 1, I always interpret that as, there's people that are dying for the rebellion, right?
Everyone that dies, or that he puts in the line of fire that dies.
Yeah.
Oh, Lonnie's another example of that, right? He would be coming back to haunt him in some way.
No, exactly. Like, what I was saying is I didn't in season 1, I did interpret that line as like something being really awful, outside of the fact that there were people dying and he was living and he had to live with that. Right. But when we get to season 2, especially when you brought like Lonnie, like he did that, right? He made that sacrifice himself. He killed Lonnie, and that's a ghost that he has to live with. On top of that, to your point about the flashbacks, right? We saw one instance, or at least we heard one instance of where people were getting, massacred by the Empire. He probably has tons and tons of those stories. There was probably lots of those missions, and those are the ghosts that he's referring to, right? Not necessarily people that he killed, but the people that died at his hands as a part of something he never really wanted to be a part of, or realized that he didn't want to be a part of no longer. He's been living with those ghosts and the regret of having, taken part in all of that, right? Been accomplice to some of those murders and those atrocities and the massacres. I mean, that's a lot to weigh on your shoulders. And like you said, to go to sleep every night, there's got to be a lot of trauma and PTSD that comes as a result of that.
Well, there's a lot of narcissism that goes with it too, right? Because he might even equate to what happens on Gorman and try to take accountability and responsibility for that too. Or internalize some of these things where they're not necessarily his fault, but he feels like he's not doing enough. He needs to do more to be able to push it forward. So, and Luthen's not above being a little narcissistic at times. So it kind of fits the demeanor too of I need to take responsibility for all of the things because the weight of the galaxy is on my shoulders, but they're broad enough I can do it, right? That a lot of overconfidence there. And then we kind of see him in season 1. He's starting to crack a little bit and under some of that pressure.
Yeah. We talked about the next line, which is I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. Going back to the legacy piece of it, I think that's where that line really hits the most for me again, right? Because, he's not getting anything from this. He knows he's not going to get anything from this. Not in the sense, I think he's hopeful that the things that he's doing, the actions that he's taking, the people that he's putting in lives, putting in harm, the people that he's killing.
Luthen Kleya, and all of that, how she now behaves and how she has grown up on top of all of that too.
Yeah. Right. What he had to do to her to get her where she's at.
Yeah.
He's right. He's absolutely damned for all this. He knows it. Like these aren't the right things to do, but he feels like he has no choice to do them. The next line goes back to what you were talking about, my anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight. They've set me on a path from which there is no escape. Right? He knows what his destiny is, and his destiny is going to be death at the hands of the Empire. He says this a little bit later down the road here, but he knows it's only a matter of time before they're going to catch up with him. He says, I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the costs. And by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. And I think that's the slippery slope with all this, right? I mean, what he's speaking to here, right?
Yeah, it's like that youthful fire you have when you start a quest, right? Or when you start this path of vengeance, and how do you keep it? This is why characters like Batman are always so compelling and interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Characters that have this vengeance idea but how do you sustain that over time? What happens whenever you finally get the thing you want? Like, what do you do? And Luthen knows he's not going to see that, but at the end of the day, how do you maintain all of that and without losing yourself? And then before long, you notice, and this is when he's talking about the ground beneath his feet. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he's truly fighting for. And all those self-doubt start to creep in as well of what am I actually leaving? What is my legacy? Like you were saying before, like you start to doubt what your legacy is. Like, how does that feel to you to not be remembered for the things that you're doing? Does it even feel like you're making a difference? And there's probably a lot of hopeless moments in there too. And you just don't know which way is up. Yeah.
I think we mentioned this when we did the breakdown of season 1, when he was given this speech, but him saying that, and by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. It's very much akin to the Dark Knight speech that Harvey gives, right? You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Right.
In a lot of ways, he's just become that, right? We talked about how, the parallels that exist between him and the Empire and what they really want from all of this are coming from two different places, but he's essentially doing things and making decisions that the Empire are making themselves and doing themselves. And so he's no different in that sense outside of, again, what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. And again, that noble intent that's coming from him versus the Empire, which is all about tyranny and rule and oppression and that sort of thing.
Right.
He then goes on to ask or question, what is my sacrifice? He says, I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life. Let's just wrap this whole thing. I burn my life to make, I went forward. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Well, hold on. Let me stop right there. So that in itself right there, I mean, like we said earlier, he knows that he's not going to see peace come from this in his lifetime. Yet he still does it every single day. And he's churned now to doing the same things. Like I just said, he's churned now to doing the same kind of things that the Empire is doing because he has to play that game, right? There's, in his mind, you're not going to win through like what Mothma says. You know what I mean? She was in the Senate and she was trying to do this the right way, going through the legal system or going through the government. None of that worked. And so Luthen already realized that years ago and realized that the only way that he was going to make any progress or really put a dent in these guys is to really play them at their own game, do the exact same types of things, be that terrorist, body or that he needed to be. And as a result, he's burned his decency, right? He's not going to see any of this. And he's doing it for people like I said earlier, doesn't even really have anybody in mind outside of Kleya. I don't know that he's thinking about, man, if I just do this, I'm going to have a better future for my child or my daughter. Or maybe he does. Again, I don't know what his backstory is or if he left his family or whatever. But at least in this sense, he's just doing all this because it probably is the right thing to do. But he doesn't know anybody that's going to certainly benefit from this. This is all for people that he will never know, and nor will those people ever probably recognize him for all this, like you said earlier.
Yeah, I mean, revolution has a cost, right? I mean, and that's kind of what it's all about. But again, the way you do it is the way to, I mean, sometimes you feel like you only have the tools that you can see. And that's what you feel like you have to go and use, or they're the ones that have the biggest bang. And they're the ones that get their attention over time. And so it's tough. I mean, whenever you feel like, you start to become them, every time you look in the mirror, you start to see a different face looking back at you. And that's a tough way to live. That's a really tough way to live.
On that note, the last line, we're not going to do though. So what do I sacrifice? Everything. He says, and the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So is that, I mean, I know we've talked about this already 2 or 3 times, but I think in my original notes, I said, well, maybe he never saw Kleya as being a mirror or an audience, or the light of gratitude. Maybe that's Vel, maybe it's Wilmon. Is there anybody outside of like Andor or Mothma that you could argue was his audience or was his mirror?
I think he's largely looking at it from a broader spectrum. I think he's going to know. I think he knows that certain people get it, but he also knows those people are right there with him and likely won't get it either. Andor would never have gotten that either, right? He may have been celebrated at one point, but he always viewed Andor probably in the same vein as him, is that you're going to suffer the same fate as me, maybe even Kleya as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what he's more or less saying to Lonnie in these moments, that ego that thought we were going to stand on the mountain, the sun was going to rise, and we were going to, plant our flag in celebration. I'm going to be right there, and it's going to be, a joyous occasion, and we'll all shake hands and we'll start to share all the amazing people that were involved to make this happen. Big celebratory. There's this, that's unrealistic and nowhere near possible. And he just knows that he's the villain. He's the Saw Gerrera, but with a little bit of a conscience, that's there to be able to do this, and all of the dirty work that has to be done. And, but I think at this point you have to ask whether or not the ego is still there with Luthen. I think to an extent it is still there. I think there's still a certain bit of swagger, you might call it, maybe not ego, but a certain amount of swagger that he knows best, and that he knows what he needs to know. That's why he stayed so long. So I think those are the things that Andor has to go and stand up for him for at the end of the day, with the rest of the Rebellion Council, of saying, look, he stayed, and this is the reason why he stayed. Kleya was pushing that same narrative. Without this, there's no way that you would have this urgency you now feel. Like you would have been another victim, and the Empire would have won. Yeah. Effectively, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of where it was at the end of the day. And so, but yeah, the one who was hoping maybe for a little appreciation at the end of the day, that side of you died long ago. Or it's still there, but it's never going to get what it wants.
So if you had to, I guess, summarize, or I don't know, put a bow on it, if at the end of the day, when he's laying there, right before he took his life and on his deathbed or whatever, like, who was he doing this for? Was it just himself at that point? Because we ruled out
taking his life, you mean?
No, I just meant like, who was he fighting for?
Like I said, like the stuff with Kleya just takes on a whole new angle with the backstory, with the flashback. Mm-hmm. So I really truly think that, this was all kind of for her in many ways. I think some of it to clear his conscience too. I think it was for him too. It's an interesting debate about how much did he really care about the rest of the galaxy, or is it just to ease his own suffering in both of those spaces, both what he's done and then also this young person that he's taking responsibility for. But I don't know. Sometimes it feels like he's in it for the greater galaxy and the greater good of the galaxy, and really does value freedom. But he kind of signed up for those missions early on too, in some capacity. Yeah. So kind of tough to tell.
No, and I'm with you. Like it's kind of I'm sure you could probably have people argue a lot of different ways, and I could see arguments.
They all have merit. Yeah, they all have merit.
They all have merit. Man, I guess it's Kleya too. Like I think that's where I would lean the most, that he is doing it for Kleya, even though with everything we've already said about the relationship, I don't even know that he would admit to himself. But I mean, it felt like she was kind of that catalyst for him, right? That kind of started him down this path.
Well, I'll tell you why too. That just popped in my head. You know, they argued like she would be the one to go take care of comms, and he says, "No, it has to be me." And think of it this way: she had to be the one to put him down if he was caught.
Mm-hmm.
Would he have been able to do it to her if the roles were reversed?
Mm.
And that's why I thought about. That's why I mean that it just kind of cemented that if the roles were reversed, how difficult would that have been for him to do it? Could he have even done it in the first place? Could he have infiltrated the hospital like she did? I don't know.
Right.
You know, but that's not something that he was prepared to do, and that's why I think he was still looking out for her at the end of the day. I mean, you could also view it that they wouldn't have listened to him. I mean, you could view it that way too. Take this to rebellion, because if they're not going to get it from me, and they're going to lock me up, they're not even going to listen to me, but they might listen to you or anybody else. But it would be kind of interesting if he protected her kind of one last time in the only way that he knew how, because he kind of had a feeling how this might shake out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd be interested to hear what other people thought or think about that question about who he was doing this for. Was it himself? Was it for Kleya? Was it for the greater good? Was it some combination thereof? Was it again more from his? Was he doing it for reasons that we just don't know fully yet because of his background too? Like I still have questions about that. You know, where he came from and what happened. Maybe there was the journey beyond that. That was the first part of it, but over the years, as he was bringing up Kleya, there were more instances and more things that happened that felt like it continued to kind of build his resolve for that. But
yeah, you have to imagine the first time that she hit the button, there was probably something there too, right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I think there was probably a lot of moments along the way that would be interesting to kind of explore and understand, and what the effect was.
Yep. So, all right. Well, I don't know. I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else you want to add in here? Anything that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I think we hit most of everything I had thought of. I mean, two just really in-depth, compelling, morally conflicting, difficult to kind of reconcile how you feel about characters. And I think that's what makes them so interesting. That's what makes them so interesting. It makes the series interesting too, of the rightness and the wrongness of it layered in with what are their true motives. I think that's what makes this story pretty great.
Any chance that we'll see either one of these get nominated for an Emmy or any other accolades for their performances, either Elizabeth Delau or Stellan Skarsgård?
I don't think so. If Stellan Skarsgård didn't get one for season 1,
yeah,
I don't know that I see it here. It's the thing about this series, when you look at individual performances, like it's such an ensemble cast that are like the whole ensemble is so good. It's really difficult to point out one particular one. You can maybe look at Genevieve O'Reilly with the speech, although this is probably a little unpopular. I think it's a little overblown, a little oversold in some ways. But when you compare it with other aspects of the show and her own moments included, that like why we're singling that out, I don't quite understand that as much, because I think there are just so many. It's just one of many that are there. And again, Genevieve O'Reilly's performance included in other aspects of the show too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's gonna be difficult for this show to get an individual person award, but man, some of I think the ones that celebrate more of the entire cast or an episode of those types of moments, I think this is one of those episodes. I think it was just really, really, really good. I don't know if it eclipses some of the other ones on Gorman, but it's right up there as one of my favorites. I like watching this one over. For whatever reason, it goes really quick too for me.
Yeah.
Like Make It Stop is the episode I'm referencing.
Yeah. Make It Stop. Yeah. It's definitely one of the highlights. A lot of people seem to have this one kind of ranked up there as a number 2, if not a number 1, right behind the final episode. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that either one of these will get nominated, to your point, because I think, well, maybe you could argue that Elizabeth Delau did better, had more opportunity to shine in season 2. So if anybody was going to be nominated, it's probably her. But I felt like, as much as I love, Luthen in season 2, and he had some great moments, of course, and the acting was there. I mean, he did everything perfectly fine. I just don't know that it was enough to really kind of, separate him and certainly put a spotlight on him for any kind of Emmy consideration. But I can definitely see where this show or this series wins an accolade for, for season 2, right, as a whole, or, maybe the director or the cinematography. Some of these, I can't remember how many categories they've submitted the nominations for, but there are quite a few of them actually.
Yeah, and with all these supporting actor type of roles, I don't know how they nominate and how they pick them. I mean, there's just so many amazing jobs. This series and other series, of course, I don't know how you pick.
Yeah.
They're just so good. And that's why the awards, it's a little disappointing. You want to be recognized and have that be recognized at the top of your game, or this was a really special moment, but at the same time, it takes a little something away that, there's a lot of amazing instances where this is happening, and it doesn't shortchange or cheapen them, but it takes a little of that luster off of what it was, what made it really great. And when you have so many in one series, it's even more difficult. I know there's several series that have the same problem of you just have a lot of amazing individual actors and individual characters that any one of them shines on any given moment, but they don't shine all the time throughout the entire series. And that's tough because you got to spend time elsewhere.
Yep.
But so again, though, I'm not taking anything away because Elizabeth Delau really, man, she really shone the second season. I'm glad this came about. I'm glad they did what they did with this character, because I think it helped Luthen's character too, and humanize him to an extent and give him another motive for what he's doing. So I love that it helped build on the characters we had too, and as well as giving her that moment to really have some gravity to what she needed to bring to the table too, and really attach ourselves to another character in the series.
Yep. Hey, well, let's end it there. I don't have a good segue, but why don't we say thank you to some folks that joined us tonight?
Yeah, the people I like to attach myself to every single week are the ones that come out in the live stream, Albert. So ktdcast.com/YouTube. If you're listening to this, thanks for the download. We hope you would like to come out and join us on a live stream sometime. Like these amazing folks, my Star Wars guys, Sky, Alex, What Up versus CPU, Steph, Zeralin, Skywalker's Academy. If I missed anybody, my apologies. Not intentional. We'd love for you to come out. ktdcast.com/YouTube.
Yep. CantinaCast.com/YouTube.
Yeah. Thanks for repeating me as you make fun of me in the chat.
How do you know that was me? It could have been anybody at the Cantina Cast that put that. It doesn't have my name on it.
Right. It could have been Lauren. Right.
Right. Speaking of Lauren, by the way, I forgot to plug. She's got her Trials of the Jedi review out now on CantinaCast.com/YouTube. I can't remember how long it was. Like a 32-minute review with spoilers. So if you're caught up, or not, if you're not caught up and you just want to know what goes down in that final novel by Charles Soule, please take a look at her video. She's gotten a ton of hits already, a lot of great comments on there. So like that video and leave her a comment, ask her questions. She's been pretty good about responding to those too. So at some point we'll be talking about that one. But
yeah, very cool.
Let's see. Anything else before we get out of here? Oh, don't forget, Sunday we'll be back to talk about Cyril Karn and Jojo Miro. That'll be a fun little conversation about that crazy couple, and maybe there'll be some Edie discussion as well. I don't know how we not talk about Edie as part of that conversation, but that's going to be fun there.
Yeah, that is a big part of their relationship too. So why not?
Yep, like it or not, it is. So, all right. Anything else before we get out of here?
That's it, my friend.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys here on the next episode.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.